Hey folks, do you remember in high school when Mr. Matthews made you write a 10-page essay right before your final exams? If you were organized about it, what that might have looked like is you would write a basic paper, a very rough draft, call it V1, right? Make some more edits, make some more changes, and then save it again and maybe save that as V2, right? And then every incremental change that you make, you just increment that version number. This is basic version control. I'm Farhad from Ethno Academy, where we provide affordable courses all taught by senior engineers who have at least 10 years of experience. And today we're going to talk about Git, GitHub, and version control. What are the differences between Git and GitHub, and what are these tools used for in the software industry? Let's get to it. If you're watching a video on Git, GitHub, and version control, you might already have some inkling that to get into software today, you have to know so much more than just proficiency at one programming language, right? You have to be proficient at a language. You have to understand how to use version control and Git and GitHub. You probably also have to have at least some knowledge of how to use SSH keys. You have to understand databases. You have to know how to use cloud platforms like AWS. And you have to know a little bit about AI. There's so much that you have to cover just to get into tech, which, hint, hint, that's why our boot camps cover all of the above. Um, so let's talk about Git, GitHub, and version control. Let's begin with that third concept, version control. Version control is a system that tracks the changes made to files. So it tracks all of the updates that are made to the software files, along with information about who made those changes and when. So it keeps a history of all these changes. And I promise you, only good things can happen when developers can figure out exactly who wrote the code that took down the entire production environment. Just kidding. Everyone is nice in tech. It also allows you to revert to previous versions if something goes wrong. And it allows you to efficiently collaborate with other developers by managing changes from each developer. So, what is Git? Git is a free version control system that tracks the changes to files. This is by far the most popular version control system today. Literally, almost every engineer uses Git. Okay, so that's what Git is. So, what is GitHub? GitHub is a cloud based platform that hosts Git repositories. So, developers use this to store, manage, and collaborate on Git projects online. So, it's important to know the difference between Git versus what is GitHub. So Git is the tool that we use for version control, and GitHub is the hosting service. It allows us to manage Git repositories online. Okay, now that we know what Git, what GitHub is, and what version control is, at least at a conceptual level, let's dive in and actually create a Git repository and push that repository into GitHub. Before we start creating a repository, let's go over the assumptions for this video. One, I'm assuming that you already have a GitHub account. If you don't have one, go ahead and create one first. Two, I'm assuming you already have Git installed on your device. If you don't, I'm going to be creating another video, which I'll be linking into the description below, probably later this week. The third assumption is that you also have your SSH keys set up. If you don't have those, let me know if you want a video on how to set up SSH keys or even what SSH keys are. Let me know in the comments below. Okay, let's dive in. To create a Git repository, the first thing we're going to do, because we're going to be linking this Git repository into GitHub, let's actually start by going to your GitHub account and creating a repository here. So from your dashboard, on the top, you have this plus sign. Go ahead and click that. Click on New Repository. And generally, whatever project you're creating in IntelliJ, or actually, I mean, regardless of what coding language you're using, it actually doesn't matter. You generally want your repository name to match whatever project it is that you're creating. just to keep you sane. Otherwise, it's so easy to lose track of the potentially dozens of repositories that you'll have over the course of your career. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to create a project called test. So we'll call this repository test with a capital T. I'm going to keep this private. If you want to create a repository that you're going to share publicly, especially if you want one that you're going to present on your resumes, this should absolutely be public so that employers can see it, or potential employers. All right, and then we'll click on create repository. Immediately, we got a series of steps. Over here, so we're not going to use HTTPS, we're going to use SSH, so make sure that's selected. You know it's selected if you see the URL as starting with git@github.com. If HTTPS is selected, it's going to start with HTTPS. Okay, so select SSH. And let's pause there and head over to either IntelliJ or the coding language that we use here is irrelevant. I'm going to create a Git repository using Java and IntelliJ, but feel free to use whatever IDE you want and whatever programming language you like. So in IntelliJ, I'm going to create a new project here. And I'm just going to call this test, again with a capital T. And I'm going to unselect the generate code and unselect, well, I do want the sample code. Let's keep that. All right. Okay, now that we're here, I just have a very basic application. Before I make any changes, the first thing I'm going to do is open up my terminal. And so terminal, if you're on Windows, this is the equivalent of command prompt. Although if you have IntelliJ, then you will also see the word terminal there. My setup automatically creates a Git repository for any project that I create. So let me undo that. So I'm going to just remove. So here's how you know you have a Git repository, first of all. If you do ls-a, so ls is short for list, -a will print out any hidden files or folders. So if I click enter, you see this .git folder over here. This is how we identify that a directory has been initialized as a Git repository. So if I want to uncreate a Git repository, all I need to do is remove that folder. And I can do that in bash by saying rm or space -rf. And then the name of the folder that I want to remove. So this is the shortcut for removing folders. Okay, so, not shortcut. This is the command for removing folders. Okay, so now this is no longer a Git repository. Let's get rid of that. If you're on Windows, the command might be slightly different for removing Git, but again, we're assuming here that you are new to Git and haven't done things like set up your project to automatically be initialized as a Git repository. Okay, so now we're starting from scratch. So here's how we take an existing project and convert it into a Git repository. To create a Git repository, the first command we're going to write is git init. And you can see in GitHub, this is the pretty much the first command that's written here. This takes an existing project and converts it into a Git repository. So once I click enter here, if I type out ls space -a, we know this is now a Git repository because we again see this .git folder in this project. Ignore your heading at the top, yours, or ignore mine. Mine probably looks different from yours. I've modified mine just to have some extra information that I like to have. I may make a separate video on actually how to modify your terminal to have information around your branch and stuff like that. So let me know if that's a useful video. If you would like that, let me know. Okay, so your next command, before we actually do a git add, let's run a git status. Git status always tells us the current status of our Git repository. If we click enter, we see a bunch of files and folders in red. This is all the files and folders that are in this project. And the message that we get is untracked files. Use git add followed by the file name to include in what will be committed. So basically, it's telling us that if we want to save any files, we have to specify which files we want to add to a staging area to be saved. We could do something like do a git add and then source and then go through these one at a time, right? Another way of handling this is to just say git add space period, and this will add any untracked files to the staging area to be saved. All right, so let's add that. It'll, when I say to be saved, that's what the next step is. So the next step is git commit -m followed by some message. Git commit is the command that takes whatever changes we've made and actually saves it to be tracked in the Git repository. So when we say git commit -m followed by some message in quote, usually this says what change we've made. So we can say, this is my first commit. So no changes were made. So as soon as we click enter, this takes all of the changes that we've made and saves it in GitHub. It's almost like a save game if you play video games. All right, let's click enter, and we can see that 7 files were changed, and we get a bunch of lines about what was created. Okay, next, it's asking me to create a branch main. I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to run this command. So the git remote add origin, this command is used to take our local repository, in other words, the repository that sits on our laptop or your device, it takes that repository and links it to some remote location on the cloud or on some website, right? So we want to link this to GitHub, specifically this repository that we're trying to create, right? So that's what this command is. Git remote add. These 3 keywords are used to specify to Git that we're trying to add a remote repository as a link to our local repository. The next word here, which is origin, is this is basically a variable. This is specifying what we want to call that remote location. Sometimes you might find yourself using 2 separate hosting services to place your application. This can happen for a few different reasons. So one potential reason is if you want to use GitHub as your hosting service for having potential employers be able to see your code, and then use another platform like maybe Heroku, which also is a hosting service, but have Heroku actually be the thing that displays a website or whatever. So that's one reason. That's one example of when you might have 2 different locations that you use for a remote repository. But for the most part, you're going to find yourself just using one repository. So when you have only one, origin is the most common keyword to use, or the most common name to call the remote repository. So I'm going to stick with that. After that, this is the link for the remote repository. And you can see that it's the same as what's up here. Make sure, because we're using SSH here, make sure it starts with git@github.com. All right. Let's copy this command. Click enter. So that adds the remote repository. Next, we're going to take our current code and push it into GitHub. Here's how we can do that. Depending on the name of your branch, you're going to use git push-u origin main, or the name of my branch is master, so I'm actually going to call this master. Here's what this command does. Git push takes your current code and pushes it to some remote location. -u is short for upstream. You only have to do this once. You only have to include the -u the first time you push your code to a remote repository. And then we specify the name origin. Remember that that was essentially the variable that we created for when we want to refer to whatever link we're using for the remote repository, right? So again, we're using origin here to specify to Git that this is the location we want to push this code to. So we're running git push -u origin, and then the name of the branch that we're on. If you run into issues at that point, there are potential possible reasons. One, your branch might not be called master, it might be called main. So try that out. Another reason it might fail is if you haven't correctly set up your SSH keys. So if you haven't correctly set up your SSH keys, or however you're communicating with GitHub, this is the point where you would hit that issue as well. Okay. Once we've pushed our code, you can see we got a bunch of responses to that last command. So we got this counting objects 100% done, delta compression, compressing objects 100%, writing objects 100%. And then it says to GitHub Farhad Ahmed /test.git. At this point, we can just go back to our browser. So go back to this page and then just hit the refresh button. And now we can see our code. So if you go to, and so this is the exact project that we have, right? We have .idea source gitignore test.iml. So that's all of these files up here. So if we navigate into source, we should see our main class. So there's our main class, and this is our hello world program. Okay, at this point, let's say we want to make some updates to our code. I can come in here and I can update this print line to say hello from Ahmed Tech Academy. So now if I run git status again, I should again see something in red, right? So in red it says changes not staged for commit, and specifically it's the main.java file within the source folder. So again, I'm going to click or type out git add space period to specify to Git that this file is something I want to be adding to the staging area to be saved when we do our git commit command. Okay. Now, if I run git status again, I see that I have something in green. So this says changes to be committed. So now what this is telling me is that I've added this file to the staging area so that when I do run a git commit command, this will actually get saved, right? Git will actually track this information. But it's also telling me that I have not yet made that commit message, right? So now I can say git commit -m, and then in quotes, again, inside of these quotes, this is usually where you specify what change you've made. So here we can say updated print line in main. Cool. Okay, so now we get this update that says one file changed, one insertions, one deletion. If I say git status again, this says my branch is ahead of origin mastered by one commit. In other words, it's telling me that it's basically tracking my commit messages in both my local repository as well as my remote repository. So this is telling me that in my local repository, I have one more commit than the number of commits that exist in the remote repository. So now if I do a git push, I don't need to say -u over here. I can just say origin master. So remember, you only need that -u in the first time you run the command. So now I can just say git push origin master. And this is what you want to see when you do a git push. You want to see counting objects 100%, compressing 100%, and writing objects 100%. This is how you know that it worked. Okay, but we can, if we want to be really sure that it worked, it's a good idea to go back into your repository in GitHub and click that refresh button and make sure that you actually see the update in the file that was changed. Another thing we can do, so now we've completed creating a Git repository, and we've also completed actually pushing that code into GitHub, and we've covered making updates. But one more thing that's cool to notice. Oops, that's not where I want to be. Test. We can actually take a look at our previous commits. So from the main page, so basically if you go to test over here, if you click on the number of commits, you can actually see what commits were made. I can go to the updated print line in main. So this is the last commit that I made, and I can see what was changed. So there was one file changed, which was main.java. This line was deleted, the one that said print line hello world, and then we added this line, hello from Tech Academy, Tech Academy. Cool. So this is how you can create a Git repository locally, and how you can connect it to a GitHub repository, and how you can manage that repository in GitHub. All right. I'll see you guys in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like and subscribe button, especially if you want to stay up to date with all of our awesome content. And if you're interested in joining Tech Academy's courses, our link is in the description below. All of our courses are 6 months at $300 per month. And all of our instructors have at least 10 years of experience. You won't find a better bootcamp out there. See you in the next video.